What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
I don't think there's anybody that I could speak to on a topic that is more important than who's well versed on the subject is Thecia Jenkins. And because the topic we're spending time today is emotional intelligence. And the reason I picked that topic for our discussion is that it is the number one topic that's going on, not just in the business world, but in our society right now. How do we emotionally respond to situations and circumstances versus react? And you see a whole lot of reaction going on. Thecia Jenkins is not only a thought leader on the subject of emotional intelligence, but I'm honored that she's also the co-author of the book we wrote together, which is Equipped to Lead: The Extraordinary Power of Emotional Intelligence. So help me, guys. Welcome, Thecia Jenkins.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and have a conversation with you today.
Oh, I love it. I've been looking forward to this. I just love the way your mind and heart speaks on this subject. Tell us, for those who are watching or listening in on this, how did you get started on this whole subject of EQ?
Well, I got started, I want to say it's been well over a decade ago, maybe even 15 years ago. My background is in working with survivors of domestic and sexual violence and providing training to law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social service workers to more effectively work with them. And after working with clients for over a decade, recognizing the impact that trauma has on one's ability to manage their emotions, because when you're constantly in trauma, it does have an impact on how you are able to manage your emotions. And then even taking a step back further, Mike, it really had to do even with myself personally, dealing with other people's trauma, secondary trauma, and because of things in my own personal life. So I began to go on a quest on how I could better show up as a helping professional and as a training professional. And I came across the work of Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ.
Yeah, it's interesting. Harvard did a study on that showed that success in our career is based 85% on our EQ and 15% based upon our IQ, which seems almost counterintuitive based upon on society. But when you've gone through this journey yourself, what's the biggest change that it caused in you when you started grasping with managing your emotional response to life situations and circumstances?
You know, Mike, I started to like me better.
Really?
Yeah. And I found that even with clients that I work with, in fact, I'm currently working with a new and emerging leader, and I use emotional intelligence as the foundation for coaching. And we were simply working around issues of low self-confidence. And so building that self-awareness, because increased self-awareness leads to better self-confidence. And, you know, what the young lady shared with me, she said, you know what? She goes, even though we've only been working together a week, she goes, I showed up in a meeting today and I was actually able to focus on the meeting. I didn't focus on, you know, all these big thoughts that were going through my head. Am I the right person to be at the head of this table? Am I the right person to be the head of this department? Because of the activity that you had me to do. Because all of a sudden I realized I really do bring a lot to this position. It's not based on my age. It's not based on how long I've been in this field. Just by being able to write down those things and embrace them. And that's a part of emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And so, you know, what you make me think about is that emotional intelligence is not, I can't cry. You know, and when we think about EQ, it's like manage my emotions. I love what you're talking about with this, which is this whole concept of the power of emotional intelligence climbs based upon what we refer to as the mindset of self-awareness. And so what guidance do you give people to become more aware of their emotional response to situations and circumstances that they might be dealing with?
It could be something as simple as, and this came up in a training not too long ago, and I just kind of said this phrase. I said, mind your face.
Mind your face? What do you mean by that?
Mind your face. Because here's the thing. How many times are we sitting in a meeting, talking to our partner, with whomever, and they say something that maybe we don't quite agree with, or that maybe rubs us the wrong way, or we're kind of quizzical, and you just kind of get that look on your face. And someone will say, well, what's wrong with you? And you're like, nothing's wrong. However, here's the thing, you're not seeing what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And so many times I will ask people to mind your face, that non-verbal, those non-verbal cues, because that's also a part of emotional intelligence. And so being mindful of, I wonder what my face looks like. You know, Mike has just said something and maybe I don't agree with it. And is it all over my face? And so being able to mind your face, because I think conflict can arise because if you're in a conversation with someone and all of a sudden they get this look on that on their face. And so here's the thing, if I also, as the person who is receiving that facial expression, and I'm thinking, Mike doesn't like me. And so that's going to begin to change my attitude. However, if I'm emotionally intelligent, I have the ability to recognize emotions in others. What I might say instead is, okay, Mike, you know, we've been talking here for about 15 minutes. Tell me what some of your thoughts are. Because noting that that look on your face may not be discussed. It may not mean that you're not on board. It simply means Mike has questions.
Yeah. And so that reminds me of what we write about. It's called Don't Make Up the Story.
Yes.
You know, stay present in the moment. Don't make up the story of what you think may be going on, or even worse than that, make up the story of what might happen if you do or you don't. And so it stops you from taking action because you move into a fear zone. And so fear starts raising itself, which causes us to get hypersensitive, and we go into a protection mode, protecting not our physical being, you know, sometimes yes, but a lot of times our ego or emotional safety. And a lot of times what we found, haven't we, that people fall into this victimization. They feel like I call it, I'm from South Louisiana, I use the word cuz a lot. I can't cuz, you know, I can't cuz of this. But this whole victimization is that my emotions, oh, that's just the way that I am. And so your emotions start to run away. And you taught me this phrase, and I hope I say it properly. I think it's called the amygdala hijack.
Yes,
you have to understand, until I met you, I never used the word amygdala with anybody in my life. All right. So, but tell us, what is the amygdala hijack? Because there's huge power in this.
Oh, yeah. So again, I will reference Daniel Goleman. When I first began to look into emotional intelligence, he talks about the amygdala hijack. And so in our brain, there is an area about the size of an almond. And that's where our learning is centered, and it's where all of our experiences are centered. And it sort of acts like a fire detector. I'll say a fire alarm. And it is constantly sensing out the environment to see, is there harm? Because its whole goal is to protect us. And so in those moments when we feel threatened, and you know, it could be in the workplace. So for instance, maybe you have a supervisor or a coworker, and they may say something that quote unquote triggers. We hear that word a lot lately, that triggers you. You turn in a report and they come to you and they may say something about the report, like, you know, did you look at this, because this isn't right? And in a person's mind, they may go way back. They may be 35 years old, but they go back to being 15, and maybe a teacher or a parent saying, you're not good enough. You always turn in shoddy work. And all of a sudden they are back 20 years ago. And that response, they may shut down because maybe at that time in their life as a child, they shut down, or maybe they acted out, and they will be acting out with that supervisor. What do you mean I didn't get it right? You didn't give me the right instructions. You know, you never tell me everything. And in that moment, that's an amygdala hijack.
Yeah, because you know, there's some point you're saying here, Thesha, that people need to understand, is that that emotional, the great, I guess, conflict that we wrestle with is when somebody's super angry, right? And there's an explosiveness in the room and we run from that. That's not the only negative emotion that surfaces a negative situation. One that is equally as damaging is for those of us, and I'm falling in this trap, that are runners. That whenever something happens is that withdraw.
Yes.
I saw my two uncles when I was like this big. I saw my two uncles literally fist fighting in my grandfather's house and wrestling on the floor. And I ran out the house, just sobbing and crying or whatever. And I can when I tell this, every time I tell it, I still picture that, but I picture it through the eyes of a 6-year-old.
Yes.
My grandparents drive up, and I became an emotional runner. That if conflict raises itself, I'd say for me to leave. And so I had to be aware of circumstances that would hijack and would cause that reaction, even though it's a different circumstance.
Right. So that whole avoidance behavior, and as we're having this conversation, I want to also bring to the table that, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's this broad umbrella that covers so many quote unquote soft skills. And as we're talking, what also I started thinking about is our behavioral styles, right? So with that amygdala hijack and learning how to manage yourself when you've been triggered, is that depending on one's behavioral style, that as an S, what that hijack may look like is some of that avoidance behavior, because automatically I want to protect myself. And even with the D style, there can become some avoidance.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's kind of fill in for those people that might not be, when you and I are talking about S style or D style, yes. We're talking about the everything DISC assessment that divides people into 4 quadrants. The D style, the dominant style, is very results based. They're very action oriented. The I style are the influencers. They're going to be people who are very people oriented, outgoing. They like to influence because of persona and interaction with people. The S style are the steadiness. Those are people that says, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And the SEAM style are the conscientiousness. They're compliance. They're rule players. They're subject matter experts, and they drive their worth based upon what they know, not look at my sense of self-importance. It's the value that I bring. And if you look at those 4 styles, all of us have a piece of each one of those sort of characteristics in us. Nobody has just a dominant style, but there's a predominant one that under stress, that dominant style is our go-to tool or resource to be able to drive. And that under stress, our dominant style might be the let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is that's great. But what happens is if I do that too much when I'm under duress, there's not enough time to do that sometimes. And I got to move more quickly. But if I can't, then I get weird. And then I start withdrawing as opposed to speaking out. I think that's what you're referring to.
Exactly. And even further than that, there's other research I've done talks about backup behavior. And again, all this leads back to the amygdala hijack. So even though the S style is more known for quote unquote kumbaya behavior, wanting consensus, under backup behavior, the S can go into attack mode sometimes when under stress, because they've been holding everything in.
Oh, it's the push down. The push down. That's a great point. I mean, for me, the negative, emotional intelligence I wrestled with was I pushed down so much over my life that in my mid-20s, I started developing severe panic attacks because I was pushing down my emotion. I was pushing down my response. I was pushing down and pressure kept building up and there was no release valve. Well, the body came up with one for me that took me a while to work our way through. And I think that's what you're referring to, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you look at this and you think in terms of, I want to talk about first responders because of you work with people under, I think, some of the most difficult emotional situations. They're walking into situations that are emotionally charged. And what have you seen people do in those circumstances most effectively to be able to learn to develop a higher sense of emotional intelligence or emotional intelligence response, I should say?
again, going back to self-awareness, I think
Mhm.
that is such a big part of emotional intelligence, and there's definitely more to it. However, I love the quote by Virginia Woolf that simply says that you cannot tell the truth about others until you're willing to tell it about yourself.
Mm.
And for those who are in helping professions such as our peace officers, healthcare providers, educators, counselors, that you really got to get to know you. Because here is the reality is that those particular professions, like none of the others, is that you're most times dealing with people in moments of crisis.
Mhm.
And being able to be non-judgmental, being able not to, as you said, make up a story about that call that you're going on, make up a story about that person who shows up in the emergency room, and being willing to ask what has happened to you.
Mm.
But that means you got to do some self-work and
Yeah.
not think that every patient is the same, not every call for a disturbance is the same. Being willing to step back and say, so tell me what happened.
Yeah. You know what you're telling me right now? It's learning the art of being present in the moment, not bringing my past and not worrying about the future, not looking at outside extraneous circumstances. Who's the person I'm interacting with right now?
Yes.
Who are they? What's going on? And so one of the things that is important is there's sort of 4 stages, isn't there, to interacting with people. This is at work and at home. And the 4 stages are, if I'm going to learn how to do a better job of managing my relationship with you, I need to understand how you're wired.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good enough. Then I got to figure out, how do I manage myself so I can, in fact, be more effective with you? Well, unfortunately, that's not enough. I got to start with what you're saying, with self-awareness. I got to start with going into this process of going to understanding who I am, how am I wired, what are my circumstances, what's going on with me right now, so I can make adjustments properly. It's being present in the moment, being present in a moment that way. I just had an emotional hijack or whatever. I forgot to turn my phone off. So yeah, I want to bend this a little bit, because we're talking about crisis. We're talking about the crisis situations, but this is so important in everyday life, isn't it? For the people that are in the grocery store and that are driving in their car, that are dealing with their kids, that are dealing with their spouse. Where do you see this thing with emotional intelligence and watching out for hijack situations, with dealing with the little things in life that have a tendency to add up and sometimes get magnified into big things because we're getting hijacked?
Wow. Where do I even begin with that? So here's a short answer is, I personally believe that everyone should get some type of teaching around emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
As I look at the world around us and the things that happen, and especially the 27 years behind me in the field of domestic and sexual violence, is all those little things, as they pile up, they become a very big thing. And we're seeing that in the incidents of violence that are happening in our world today, that people are not able to effectively manage their emotions, to be able to identify those emotions of when they feel as though they have been rejected and now they're lashing out in our society. Okay. Not being able to develop healthier coping skills. One of the things that is happening on a national basis, and even here in Houston, through Houston Independent School District, is social emotional learning. Social emotional learning, which is just another way of saying emotional intelligence. However, being able to speak into this next generation, and how important is that, Mike, when we think about how many babies have been born during this pandemic, how many children have experienced the pandemic, on top of all the other trauma that happens in this world. Being able to help our young people, who will be our future, be able to manage their anxiety, to be able to manage their fear, to be able to manage how they make decisions is so key, because those same abilities that if we can teach that at a younger age, those individuals become our future leaders for tomorrow. They become our judges. They become our peace officers. They become our educators. They become the physicians. They become the CEOs. And when they learn how to have a better sense of self-awareness, self-confidence, and empathy, being able to put themselves in another person's shoes and to ask, how would I feel if I was getting this news about this diagnosis? How would I feel if I were the one who was being laid off? Those same skills that are going to be used in the professional space are skills that we should be encouraging with our young people. And I hope that resonates and makes sense.
Yeah, there's an art and a very important message in what you've just shared. It's learning that when I'm dealing with situations and circumstances around me, to not be so focused on my response to whatever the circumstances are, but more importantly, to move in that situation by asking questions, by going to the situation and encouraging other people to express themselves. It's the Stephen, Covey principle: seek first to understand before being understood. It's developing that muscle, and especially as leaders, right? Because as leaders, we get our value out of being able to tell you what the right thing is. But the reality is, as leaders, there's huge value in releasing the energy of the people around us to help them to become more productive. And that's, again, at home and as work. And it's when somebody feels heard, they feel valued.
Yes.
They feel valued.
Yes.
And that's what you're saying is that in order to do that, sometimes I have to take my ego and push it down. Right? I have to take my desire for what I think is right. Right. And a lot of times I'm not trying to solve the issue. I'm trying to be right.
Yep.
And that is really destructive sometimes when it comes to building a team connection. And really also, you hit on something because of the work you've done in domestic violence. My wife talks about this publicly, so I can, but she's a sexual abuse, victim, from early childhood, and of course that baggage is carried along. So I'm very sensitive to this whole subject. And what I've learned through the process is when somebody feels that their situation, circumstances, and viewpoints, as they're trying to cope with trauma, from the past, that magnifies, I can say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. That happened 40, 50, 60 years ago, whatever. All right. I could go down that road, but that's not at all beneficial as much as tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what's happening. What's this? What did I do to flip this trigger? As opposed to go, well, it's not my fault. Right. And so that it bangs into itself strongly. And so, this is such a huge topic, and we were laughing before we got on that we could have spent all day on this subject playing with it or whatever. But let me ask you just what is there something in our journey of writing Equipped to Lead, some message that's in there, that's one that you've used in the training that you've done since the book came out at the end of last year? Is there something in there that's sort of like the favorite point that you always like to either point people to or resonate with, or that spoke to you?
Oh, wow. So probably one of my favorite strategies is about doing the SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm. Because I often say that you are the CEO of YOU Incorporated.
Mm-hmm. I tell them about SWOT for those who haven't heard that phrase.
And so the SWOT, it is a marketing tool, and it's about your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Mm-hmm. And so when I am working with individuals, that's what I start off doing, is doing that SWOT analysis. And that's when I bring in also that behavioral disc profile. However, the SWOT alone is being able to identify, what are my strengths? Because again, you cannot tell the truth about others until you're willing to tell it about yourself. What are you good at?
Yeah, and own that. Yeah, own that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And then taking those, then moving over to our weaknesses, those areas that we need to address. And by being able to do that, a person had an aha moment recently in one of my online trainings, and they were like, "Oh my God," because the strength is that I'm independent. But then when we began to come over and process weakness, independence also became a weakness.
You betcha, because what happens is those things that are strengths, sometimes they become a weakness, because what do? We overuse the strengths.
Yes.
That in my directness is great. However, if under certain circumstances, it could be attacking, perceived that way.
Exactly. And so that becomes part of that whole self-awareness, is recognizing that, yes, I am independent, I am direct. However, I may also put people off, I may overlook people, I may not extend opportunities to other people to grow if I'm so independent, because therefore I'm not delegating. And if I'm not delegating as a leader, I am not promoting growth.
Yep, huge. That's huge.
So I'll wrap this up for the sake of time, but then moving down to opportunities. So taking that same strength that I am direct, that I am independent, what are some opportunities? Well, that opportunity is that within my company, if I'm working for someone, if I'm working for myself, how can I use the fact that I am direct, that I am independent, that I am organized, so that when I am marketing myself, right, that I can say, you know what, I have 100% return or ROI on whatever it is, but being able to market those strengths, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then moving over to threats. And that takes us back to those weaknesses that, because I am so direct, because I am so independent, I've alienated my staff. My staff is not growing.
Yeah. And what happens into it, if we don't deal with the threats, that's where the submarines lie. The threats where the submarines lie. They're gonna get me at some point in time if I don't deal with, if I don't recognize them. Right. And so I've got to be able to come in and do it, which falls us back down to self-awareness. And so, Thesha, you're a delight to talk to. I knew I'd have so much fun with this. Thank you. And it's such an important topic. I believe that we need to, and you brought up points of what we're wrestling with, not just in the business world, but in society today's time. It's something we need to spend more and more time with. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to, especially with what you do with the domestic violence and situations along those lines, that somebody wants to connect with you and have further conversations? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, they can reach me on LinkedIn at Thecia Jenkins, so TheCiA Jenkins. So I'm on LinkedIn. Also can visit my website, TheciaJenkins.com.
Super. We'll drop those things in the show notes also to go along with this thing. Then hold up our book so everybody can see this thing we've written. So that's Equip to Lead. You can get it on Amazon if you want to, or if you want a signed copy, you can either go to Thesha's website or mine, and you can purchase it there. We'd be honored to get that in your hands. And the cool thing about the books is that I think, what are they, like 22 chapters? And then they've got these things at the end that we created that are, what are they? Reflection.
And that's the biggest part of emotional intelligence, is that ongoing reflection. And that helps us to be responsive versus reactive. Yeah.
So what we did is we took it out of concept and put it into practical application. So we'd love to continue the conversation with anybody that wants to. Again, Thesha, thank you so much, and continue doing the amazing work you're doing, changing lives.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.